Hello everyone. It's 11:28 in the morning on 8/2/2015, and this is my first video in my vlog. Um, I had a lot of plans for what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to make you guys a big elaborate kind of presentation with music and a few photograph clips and things like that, and kind of start this thing off with a bang. However, what I've discovered is that I thought of all those things back when I thought that Epic was going to move a little bit faster than they actually did. So it's kind of coming down to the wire right now. I'm still in Ann Arbor, and I have 5 more days of work left at this point, and then about a week off, and then I'm out. So rather than giving you the big elaborate thing, if I want there to be any videos at all, I've got to do these first couple in a very just jump to it, me talking in front of a camera kind of style. And yeah, hopefully the style and content of these videos will improve once I am in Korea. Um, by the way, if you're new to the channel, I'm going to Korea. That's the idea of this vlog. Um, I was accepted into the Epic program in February. No, I wasn't. I applied in February. I was accepted about a month and a half ago officially. So I wanted to take this video to do a couple of things. I wanted to talk about what the vlog is going to do, what its use is as a channel, and also just answer kind of the initial question of why I want to go in the first place. Um, and I'm sorry that it's just me talking to a camera. I promise that they'll get more interesting, but these first couple are probably just going to be me rapping. And I wanted to do these specifically because I sort of felt like when I looked back at all of this in hindsight, it was going to be nice to have a record of my state of mind prior to leaving to be able to compare to how the experience over there altered some of my frames of mind. Um, so I wanted to make sure that I recorded this before I even got on the plane. So this video is going to cover the channel logistically a little bit, and I'm going to talk about why I want to go to Korea. And then the next video is going to be even more boring because I'm going to talk about the Epic application process. And I wanted to do that specifically because there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily told to you that if you are interested in applying yourself and you've stumbled across these videos, I really want you to know in advance. So that's going to be episode 2, Encounter at Lansing. So if you are considering applying to Epic, I highly recommend that you go to that video if it's up, which it should be. I'm probably going to record them both today, or if nothing else, the second video will be up within a week. So this channel is obviously a vlog that's going to be kind of aimed at friends and family back in the States, but I'm trying to make it evolve into something that's more appealing to a broad audience. Um, and while there's, it's kind of a trope at this point to go to Korea and either have a blog or a vlog or both. Almost everybody does it, or at least tries to. Some of them, cut themselves off a couple of weeks in and never go back to it. But everybody tries to do a vlog or a blog. It's become so commonplace. So something that I want to do overall is kind of do something just a little bit different. I want to present some of the typical tropey ways of going about doing the vlogs in a new and unique way. And I've always obsessed over game reviewers and things like that and the styles they use. So I kind of want to incorporate some of those styles into the videos once I start getting over there and there's actually things to show you. I don't really have a lot to show you here right now because I'm still in the States. But that I think is going to be a lot of fun if I can do it well. And I should be able to. I have good software for it. I've got some experience doing it now through AMVs and things like that. So I should be able to get some pretty good content that'll both help friends and family keep up with me, and also general people thinking of coming to Korea either to work or for tourism, and see what's out there. So the big question that always comes up for people is, why do you want to go to Korea? And I will say that most of the time when I get this question, it's coming from people that don't know anything about the country necessarily. And a lot of them have a lot of preconceptions that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not really addressing those preconceptions right now necessarily, but I can tell you that usually they think that Korea is a very poor country. It's amazing to me, without passing too much judgment, how many people don't know the difference between North and South. Um, they think it's mostly agricultural. They think it's, I'm going to be living in a little straw hut. Uh, and it's hard to even say these things with a straight face because um, it's such an advanced country, and in many ways, I think it's far more advanced than we are. But people want to know why Korea, and I think that it's important to go back a lot further than Korea for me. Um, to when I was a really little kid, there were some formative things that happened in my formative years that I think brought me to this point. So, a couple of the earliest ones I can remember, um, my extended family, actually my entire family except for me, is from Florida. I had the misfortune of being from Mississippi, although I don't remember it. But everybody in my family, including my brother and my parents, my grandparents, they're all from Florida. So I spent a decent amount of time as a kid in Florida, and both in the Gulf Coast area and a little bit on the Atlantic side around Jacksonville. Um, and through most of my life, with a short exception of a short stint in Ohio, I've lived kind of on the East Coast um, until I moved here to Michigan. But the interesting thing was, obviously if you're in Florida, you're spending a lot of time on the beach, and I think one of the earliest formative memories I've had of that experience was staring off over the ocean, whether it was the Gulf or the Atlantic, and having this kind of existential moment as a 6-year-old, as a 5 and 6-year-old, of realizing there were people on the other side of that ocean, and they lived different lives from me. They spoke a different language than me, and they thought different than I did, and I was just immediately fascinated um, by the idea of these essentially other worlds. And I think, without realizing what I had stated at that time, I was also starting to process this idea that America, the United States in particular, because of its geography and also a little bit because of its political climate, it kind of gives you this geocentric bubble effect where you sort of feel isolated. And unless you're in a position where you can travel a lot, like you're in the military or you're just Moneybags McGee, you don't really experience the international community. So to you, and to me, even right now, another country feels more like another planet. The oceans might as well be space because you're so disconnected. Even our close neighbors, Canada and Mexico, we don't really, everything feels separated from us. So there's this instant feeling of exploration, even though you're talking about places where people are and people have been and people travel between them all the time. I've never traveled. I've never gone out of the country once in my life. In fact, when I fly out of Chicago, I will be going the furthest west I've ever been. I haven't even been to the other side of the country before, but I've always, from that moment on, been kind of obsessed with this idea of exploring other countries. Um, a couple of other things started happening really early when I was young. I feel like you you have three family types that you can be born into. You can be born into a Star Wars family, a Star Trek family, or a family that's just lame. And I had the luck of I was born into a very much a Star Trek family. Star Trek and Indiana Jones was my bread and butter as a kid. Those were my fictional heroes. Um, and so what I latched onto from those franchises was that notion of exploration, is to explore strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations. That immediately registered with me. And Captain Kirk and Indiana Jones very quickly became kind of role models, fictional role models. Does that suggest that I think I'm going to go to Korea and punch a Nazi in the face? Yeah, of course it does. But more importantly than that, it's not just about punching the Nazis in the face. It was always about going to these other worlds and kind of integrating yourself into the culture and having an adventure. And that's what I kind of wanted my life to be all about. Um, So when it got to be time to go to college, well, hold on. Let me back up a little bit because there's a couple of other things that definitely need to get talked about. I can't just go right into college. So I think that the other big one then, if we're talking about fiction, as I started getting older, if you're a nerdy kid, as I am, in the early 2000s especially, the anime craze just blew up. And I was right there, dead in the center of it. And I'm a huge anime fan to this day. So the contact with Asia, which had already kind of been established when I was younger, because another thing that happened is when I was 10 or 11, we started, maybe I was younger than that, maybe 7 or 8, we started getting these mail-in order things that I really liked. I tried finding a picture of them to do for like a blog because they were really cool, and I'm sure they're gone now. I think Scholastic or something did them. But they were like these spy kits, and you got like a little cardboard suitcase, and there was all these things like decoder rings and the little red lenses that you can put over to see the hidden messages and stuff. And then every month they would send you a bunch of like these puzzle books that taught you about different countries. So there was like a Mexico one and an Italy, and then there was a Japan and a China. And I specifically remember the ones that were China, Japan. I think there was a Korea. All of those were my favorites out of all those little adventure books as a kid. And so then getting into high school and the anime craze, Japan, of course, immediately became an obsession. I still didn't know all that much about Korea, but I had started having contact with it. I studied in Okinawan martial art when I was about 16. And so just being in the martial arts community, I started learning about Taekwondo and Taekyon and Gungdo and things like that. So that was some of my first contact with Korea. It wasn't until I started getting into college, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do major-wise, but I had had enough teachers in my life that were important to me that I knew I kind of wanted to be one. And I actually wanted to be an English teacher, but I was thinking more along the lines of literature at the time because storytelling is also a big thing with me. And I got into creative writing when I was, let's see, probably about sixth grade. I started getting into writing creatively. And I still write fiction to this day. So being an English teacher seemed like an obvious fit. Um, But what ended up happening was I went from that to wanting to get into psychology. I just suddenly became fascinated by that subject. And then in psychology, I came full circle around again because when I took some of my earliest psychology classes, they started talking about different career fields in psychology. And I very quickly discovered that educational psychology was my favorite subject. I was most interested in how people learn and how they think, which still kind of fed in with the whole internationalism of my thought process because I was interested in how that differs between countries. Um, but then I quickly realized, it's going to be a lot cheaper if I just major in education than if I try to get a 4-year degree in psychology and then try to specialize in educational psych and take another 4 years. It's just, I was already broke. I wasn't trying to go through all that. So I decided to pursue a teaching route. And I ended up deciding in my pretty much my freshman year coming into my sophomore that that's when I discovered two programs, JET and EPIC. And I also started learning about things like Hagwons and things like that. And essentially what these programs were programs where you went to a country, usually Japan or Korea, Japan for JET and Korea for EPIC, and you signed a 1-year contract to teach in one of these countries. Um, and I knew right away that this is what I wanted to do. And I focused my entire major around this concept. So all of my education classes, if I could make something ESL themed, I made it ESL themed. If there wasn't an ESL major for the undergrads at that time, so education was my best bet. And I don't think my alma mater has one to this day. I think they just recently started doing a TESOL Masters, a Teaching English as a Second Language Masters. But I focused all of my education classes around ESL whenever I could, and then I ended up minoring in intercultural studies, hoping that was going to give me a little bit of a boost because after doing some research, I decided if I could, I didn't want to go private. I wanted to go to a public school in one of these countries. The question really ended up becoming which one was it going to be, Japan or Korea? So the research began, and it's been 6 years since I started it, and Japan seemed the obvious first choice. When you're an anime fan, you just have this natural love affair with Japan. It's kind of hard to help. What I didn't realize was how much of that same kind of subculture Korea really had lended itself to. Um, but one of the first things on a more practical side I realized was, okay, Korea is a lot more economically stable for an English teacher than Japan is in so many ways. It's just the program. It's the difference between steak and ramen essentially, because you're making the same amount of money between the two, but generally speaking, Japan's cost of living is significantly higher, and Korea at that time, they may have changed this, but right now and back then too, Epic and most of the private schools would give you an apartment. Whereas Japan, they were like, we'll help you find one, but they're not going to pay for your apartment outright because it's so expensive there. So I very quickly realized, if I can find a great love for Korea like I have for Japan, then I would really like to, because Korea is definitely, just on a very, very practical, logical sense, Korea seemed like a much better deal. And I found good things and I found bad things that people were reporting. I will talk a lot about those in later videos, but the more I started trying to get into it and I learned a little bit of the language and I started getting into the popular culture and the history, I found myself really, really loving Korea. And maybe it was partly a little bit of a hipster mentality that Korea was like the underground Japan. Like everybody, within our circles loved Japan, and they would like to, at least pretend like they knew what they were talking about. I know lots of people that I really kind of think are full of it, but they like to talk like they know a lot about Japanese history and Japanese culture, and it's probably mostly a white boy complex. But Korea was kind of hipstery in that way. Not everybody knew all that much about Korea. And I found a lot of things really fascinating about Korea. I fell in love with the Shilla Empire. It's one of my favorite points in history. I started really enjoying some of the music, though probably not the music you're thinking of. I got really into K-dramas. I really started appreciating the language. And Gungdo, which is Korean archery, really fascinated me. Their film culture was really cool to me because, like I said, I got into Japan because of martial arts and anime and video games. I can't believe I've skipped video games this whole time. Video games were huge for me and always will be huge for me, and I will talk about them quite extensively on this channel, so get ready for that. But Korea seemed to have a live action culture that's still generating itself to be almost competitive with anime culture, which is pretty cool. Um, and they also contribute to each other quite a bit. There's quite a few shows that are in Korea that are just live action adaptations of Japanese comics, which are called manga. Manhwa is the Korean version. And also a lot of the animation for anime gets done in Korea. Um, so there was all of that. There was just in the food I started getting into. But these are all very low-lying things about a culture. These are the things that any tourist finds out about a culture, is kind of its arts in a broad way, its cuisine, a little bit of its language. These are all typical touristy things. There's other things, though, about Korea that I've come to really appreciate that I think run a little bit deeper. And I don't want to get too political, but I feel like we could learn quite a bit from Korea, if nothing else, just by looking at its history with a little bit of perspective. And I don't want to get into that too much here, but it's something I'll definitely talk about. As some of this is, I feel this way, and yet I don't want to say it on a camera because I don't want to get over there and then have to revert everything. Be like, no, it wasn't quite like this. I have some presumptions. I think it's just human to make presumptions, but I want to go there and experience things for myself. With that being said, there are some stuff about living in that country that I'm really looking forward to trying. That's some of the designs seem to have efficiency and environment and harmony in mind a little bit more than we do, and I'd like to see how that works and how we could incorporate it. And that's just one example of some things that I'm really looking forward to experiencing in Korea. But ultimately, I'm not even gonna mince words about it. Going to Korea is my Star Trek fantasy. It's me exploring strange new worlds and seeking out new life and new civilizations and boldly going where I've never gone before. And that's really why I want to do it. It's because it's there. It's the classic Everest um, explanation. So where we stand right now is that I have, and I will explain a lot more. The next video is going to be all about Epic and the process. So if you consider this story, if you've actually made it this far in this 20-minute video, if this story was from me being born to me going into college, the next part will be all about the Epic process, and that's going to be specifically for people going into Epic. Is why I want to give them that information. Um, so I'm going to do that video for the Epic process, and then the next video you see is going to be the trip to Korea, the actual plane ride. And my hope for this channel is to update at least weekly. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that for me to be able to do that, I have to deregulate. There has to be no rules. Um, I can do it any way I want. I can talk about anything I want. So, one week you might be getting a tour of a castle in Korea. The next week you might just be getting a video game review of something I've been playing lately. Because just like journaling, I've found that that's the only way to keep something going. Is just to not give yourself a whole bunch of rules and just let yourself go and do whatever you like. So thanks for watching. I hope that I keep this up, and I think it's a good way of it, if nothing else, even if the rest of the world's bored by it. It's a good way of keeping engaged with people back home who don't necessarily always have time to Skype when our time frames are going to be so different once I jump the ship. So I'll go ahead and cut myself off now, and I will see you at Encounter at Lansing.